The thrift store is full of solid pieces of vintage and antique furniture just waiting for a new life. And the secret ingredient to transforming and upcycling some of these pieces is fabric softener. For this project, I took a trip to my favorite thrift store and spotted this vintage solid wood chair for $25 that had beautiful carvings and was super comfortable to sit in. To start, I began sanding the wood portion of the chair with 80 grit sandpaper and an orbital sander to remove the bulk of the stain from the arms, legs, and back of the chair. Because this chair had lots of grooves and small spaces where the orbital sander couldn't reach, I sanded the rest of the stain off by hand with 80 grit sandpaper, then went into all the nooks and crannies with my Dremel. To remove the remainder of the stain, I sprayed the wood with oven cleaner, allowed it to sit for about 30 minutes, then used a stiff brush to scrub it down. Once I was done scrubbing, I washed all the oven cleaner off and allowed it to dry overnight. The next day, I did a final sanding with 220 grit sandpaper, then used a brush to remove all the dust from the crevices and vacuumed the entire chair. Next, I painted on some wood conditioner to the wood, allowed that to dry for about 30 minutes, then stained it first in the color Early American, then I went in with a gel stain in the color Hickory. Once again, I allowed the wood to dry overnight. Once the stain was completely dry, I used my upholstery cleaner to deep clean all the fabric, then I taped off the wood around the upholstered sections. To transform the upholstery, I first mixed a base coat of fabric paint, which was 1 part latex paint to 2 parts fabric softener. I started off with about 4 ounces of paint and 8 ounces of fabric softener and mixed it all together. Before painting the upholstery, I used a water bottle to spray the fabric and used my hand to ensure that there was even distribution of the water. Then I applied a light layer of paint to all of the upholstery, allowed it to dry for a few hours, then went in for a second layer of the base coat. Once the first 2 coats of paint were dry, I used a 400 grit sanding block to lightly sand the paint, then wiped away the dust. Next, I mixed up a batch of the final color paint, again using 4 ounces of paint and 8 ounces of fabric softener, then sprayed the fabric with water and applied the next coat. I allowed the paint to dry for a few hours, then applied 3 additional coats in the same way for a total of 6 coats. I found that it was important for the fabric to be wet before applying the next coat of paint, but I only found the need to sand twice throughout the whole process. Once the paint was dry, I added a layer of feed and wax to the wood portions of the chair instead of sealing it with a top coat because I liked the look of the raw wood best. Now the chair is complete. I'm so happy with how it turned out. It went from a dated chair to a more stately piece of furniture that fits my style so much better, and what really made the biggest impact was painting the fabric.
First thing I have done is clean it very thoroughly with very hot soapy water and rinse that off. And now I'm going to sand. Once I've sanded it all, I then remove any dust with a microfiber cloth. And now I'm ready to do my tabletop. What I plan to do is to decoupage this wonderful material to the top. So I have cut the fabric, which is 100% cotton, larger than the surface by about a couple of inches all round. That's important. Don't cut it to fit the size of the surface. But before I stick it down, I'm going to paint. And it's always a good idea when you're decoupaging with paper or fabric to paint the surface first and choose a colour that's in the fabric. In this instance, I'm going to paint it red, as that's the predominant colour. So I'm just going to paint all over the top. Once this is all painted, we leave it to dry, and then we come back and apply the fabric. My paint is dry now, so now I'm going to stick the fabric onto the top. And I'm going to use for this another Country Chic product. It is their clear coat. It is a water-based product, and it is what you would use to top coat over paint. But I'm actually going to use this product as my glue to stick the fabric down. So I'm going to apply this very liberally all over the top. I will then put the fabric on top of the glue. Okay, that's well saturated now. So take my fabric that I did iron actually before I plan to use it, and placing it like that. Using my hands, I'm going to smooth down all over. You can wear gloves to do this if you like, but I really like to be able to feel what I'm doing. So now that is all flat and in place, I'm now going to apply another coat of the clear coat on top. And this time I'm going to go over the edges of the fabric. And that also is a very important step. Right, that's completely covered now, and the edges, so I will now leave that to dry. While it is drying, I'm going to take the opportunity to paint the rest of the table, to paint the legs. My table is now painted and dry, and so is the fabric. So I'm going to show you how we remove these extra pieces. So the first thing you do, and well, I'm doing on this table because of the design of it, I'm pushing the fabric back on itself and using an X-Acto knife and the blunt side of the blade, I'm running that along to give myself a guide as to where I'm going to cut. Then, very carefully, put your blade through the fabric, and do this so you can see it, and pulling away from the table, run the blade through the fabric like that. And once you get going on it, it kind of takes up its own momentum and just keeps going. Now, the next most important bit is that we're going to sand this fabric. And I've got some 400 grit sandpaper here, which I'm going to use because it's a new piece. You can also use a 220 sanding sponge, but I don't have a clean one and I don't want to mark the fabric. So using this, I'm going to sand all over. And as soon as you do it, you will feel a difference in the fabric. It now feels really, really smooth, whereas before the top coat had a kind of grainy feel to it. Now it is smooth. Then we take our top coat again, and this time I'm using a really soft synthetic brush because I don't want any brush strokes to be apparent. So I've got my same top coat here, and I'm going to apply the coat all over the top again. Okay. And now leaving that to dry yet again, we will then come back and we'll sand it again. And now it feels like silk. So I'm going to give it another coat of my top coat. And this is really going to build up nicely. And here is my little boho table. The top has got a really durable surface on it now, and you would never guess that that was fabric.